Okay guys, before I start this video, please do me a solid favor on this Thursday morning, and that is like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, also click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere, and share the video as well. And yes, super chats are open in the live chat. You can go into the live chat during this and say hi if you'd like, or maybe donate what you can. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, support me over in all the links in the description, as I mentioned. You can go and find me at all your favorite podcast affiliates, that being iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Audible, to an extent, SiriusXM, Radio Public. Wherever you can find a video and audio podcast, you will probably find mine there as well. Also, support me and follow me over at rumble.com, also at odyssey.com and Vimeo. Also, you can support me over at patreon.com and at Cash App and Venmo. That would be greatly appreciated as well. I also have two stores you can check out. The top link is my new Fourth Wall store. I only have one bit of merchandise up there, but there will be more coming, I guarantee you that. And then on the bottom is the link to the OG Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. Now, with that said, let's get into this topic here. And the title of the video pretty much gives away exactly what this is about. And that is the fact that about a month ago, Andrade El Idolo, Andrade Cien, or just Andrade, was released by WWE due to numerous violations. Mostly being, when he would do like, I guess basically, the drug testing and all that, and they obviously found some stuff, in his system that was not allowed, so he was eventually let go due to that. And also due to the fact that he had been ghosting them for a while, like he wasn't returning their calls about, hey, we have some ideas for you and stuff like that. It's like basically he was done. He was mentally, he was, I wouldn't say mentally checked out, but it definitely felt like, or sounded like I should say, that he was mentally checked out with WWE. Not checked out of pro wrestling, but just, with WWE, for the time being. So what happens? Well, because of his violations and him ghosting them and all that, he was eventually terminated from his contract. Now, what's interesting about this is you would think, okay, he's terminated. That means he doesn't have to, abide by any, non-compete clause, whether it's 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, 120 days, you name it. He's, pretty much free to go. He can pretty much sign with whoever he wants to sign with. And it did seem like that. It did seem like that would be the case because we saw him not long after these reports came out. We saw him not long after these reports came out re-debut, return to AEW and attack Kenny Omega, thus becoming historically the first professional wrestler to go from WWE to AEW, back to WWE, and now back to AEW. So he has that distinction, on his resume. But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. That return to AEW, you're going to have to put with a massive asterisk. That's right, a massive asterisk. Because apparently, according to numerous reports, after he, made his return, his re-debut with All Elite Wrestling and attacking Kenny Omega and joining the Don Callis family, the following week, he was not seen with the family in the group shot, nor was he seen in this video that All Elite Wrestling had posted for Don, with the Callis family celebrating Don Callis' birthday. And on top of that, around this same time he returned to AEW, he went on to win the Crash World Championship, ending potentially the longest reign that the previous champion had, which I think went for about 3 years, 4 years or something, 2 years, I don't really know. But anyway, he ended up, winning their championship, ending, I think it might have been actually 4 years or something like that, or at least 3.5, because they said the reign went for about 999 plus days or something. I'm not really sure. But anyway, like I said, immediately after returning to AEW, attacking Kenny Omega, aligning with the Don Callis family, and then, and within that same time frame, winning the Crash World Championship, he disappeared. He basically vanished from the face of the earth. And again, he wasn't, seen in the group shot, the following week on Dynamite or Collision. He wasn't, He was, mysteriously pulled from all future bookings, independently, here in North America and internationally. So obviously the question was, what's going on? And of course, the first assumption would be like, well, all of this is not a good sign because you know how the wrestling business is. You know how it wears on you mentally and all that, and everything going on personally. A lot of that, a lot of that would point most, in the most negative of directions, if you know what I mean. Well, thank God that wasn't the case, because now we do have some clarification as to what happened. You see, what happened, and this is one of those rare situations where it has happened in wrestling before, and this is why you don't see talents, show up after a while. And this has happened, like I said, numerous times, and probably more times than I could count within the history of wrestling. From the '80s, the '90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, even the '70s. I can guarantee you this happened. I mean, this goes as far back, believe it or not, to the 1950s and '60s, with that whole Buddy Rogers situation or something to that extent. But what happened basically, because again, all those signs to, something negative, something bad happening, with Andrade, you can flush those down the toilet. Because what actually happened is there was a bit of a miscommunication on all parties' fronts. That's right. Apparently, get this, Andrade, when he was fired and he was terminated, he did not, and I'm trying to be careful how I say this, he did not have the freedom that he thought he had to sign with other companies or make other appearances, competitive wise. He did not have that freedom, or he did not have that right legally. And why? Because his firing, his termination, basically is treated like a regular release. In other words, he has a non-compete clause was added to his contract when he made his return to WWE in 2024. That's right. He had a non-compete clause added to the contract should the time ever come that he'd be released due to either maybe budget reasons or pretty much have his contract, terminated with them due to violations. And that's basically the situation here. Apparently, Andrade didn't realize, well, and again, a lot of people go to come up with assumptions, reading into this, but apparently Andrade, Tony Khan, AEW, WWE, all parties involved had no idea that Andrade was not supposed to show up until 90 days after his non-compete clause expired. So depending on when he was released officially in WWE, depending on when he was released officially, he was not supposed to show up anywhere until 90 days after. So let's say he was released around the time we found out, which I think was mid to late September. Then basically mid to late October is 1 month. November is 2 months. He wouldn't have been able to show up until World's End. That's when he would have shown up. He wouldn't have been able to show up anywhere, any other time until then. And excuse me there. And what's crazy is basically all parties had a miscommunication when it came to that. Excuse me again. But they had a miscommunication when it came to that. And Fightful, along with other outlets like PWInsider, and even if you believe him, Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer, or Wrestling Observer newsletter, they all said basically something similar, if not, differently, but similar to the whole situation. Basically, they gave their own opinions. In fact, I'm going to read you this that basically Fightful put up. Fightful put up about, I would say, 51 minutes ago, about an hour ago, depending on when you're listening to this, because I'm recording this right now at 11:29 a.m. in the morning. But here's what Fightful had to say, and I quote. This is Fightful, and I quote: Andrade's situation is a mess. After popping up in AEW in early October, Andrade disappeared and was pulled from indie bookings. Things were very quiet in the weeks that followed, until Wrestling Observer, WON, revealed that WWE sent AEW a cease and desist indicating that he was still under contract to them. Sources that we spoke with familiar with the situation said they didn't believe it was AEW or Andrade's fault. Let me reread that. Sources that we spoke with familiar with the situation said they didn't believe it was AEW or Andrade's fault. Rumors of the situation emerged eternally last week with the belief that WWE had just effectively told Andrade he was done, without any knowledge of a 90-day non-compete. At that point, Andrade began taking additional bookings and signed with AEW. He had a team of representatives speak with Tony Khan, and Tony and Andrade saw each other for the first time the day of his return. WWE staff, roster, and sources also believed he was gone from the company with no additional time left on his deal ever since Andrade was fired by WWE. Under normal circumstances, WWE could technically ask him to come back. Let me read that. It says, under normal circumstances, WWE could technically ask him to come work upcoming television, but that would undermine the wellness policy element of his departure. No agents we spoke to have heard of pay being docked during a wellness violation either. Let me read that. No agents we spoke to have heard of pay being docked during a wellness violation either. A number of people have indicated to Fightful, to Fightful Select, that Andrade has a very quote-unquote good lawyer, but didn't specify if he was fighting it. Basically, they didn't say whether or not he, was going to fight the situation or he wasn't. The 90-day period is often referred to as a non-compete, but is actually more of a notice of contract expiration as talent gets paid. PWInsider reported that Andrade would not be getting paid during that 90 days, but we've not confirmed that. It would be very easy to fight it in court. The conflicting element is that almost any court situation to fight, it would extend past the 90 days. Continuing on. There were actually non-competes in the past, such as Brock Lesnar when he left WWE in 2004. Per the terms of his release, he signed a non-compete for years and wasn't getting paid. However, that didn't hold up in court. Lesnar even changed his name of his F5 finish to the Verdict. Now, in case you guys are wondering what that means, basically when Brock Lesnar left WWE in 2004 after WrestleMania 20, he wanted to go off and do some other things. He wanted to try the NFL with the Minnesota Vikings. That didn't work. And then he decided he was going to go back to wrestling. But the problem is that he couldn't do, wrestling, on a national, worldwide level. Like independent-wise, non-national, non-televised and everything, non-notoriety and everything. Very small independent shows, yeah, he could probably do those. And even minor shows he could probably do without being seen on television. I mean, a good example of this, a good example of WWE allowing a wrestler, whether still with them on the roster actively or they've been released, but they have this stipulation of not appearing nationally. A good example of that recently was with Natty. Natty was in a match at NWA on an NWA 70, not 75th, but the NWA Crockett Cup. She was in a main event match for the NWA Women's Championship. I think against Kenzie Page, and yeah, she didn't win. But everybody expected that match to be televised or at least seen on screen, be commentated on and everything. But because she's still a current WWE superstar, they didn't allow that to happen. It's like, yeah, you can go and compete. She can go and compete for the NWA Women's Championship, and put Kenzie Page over, but she cannot. But you cannot showcase that on television because she's not one of your talents. She's one of ours. It's that kind of a situation, or at least similar to it. Now, continuing, and basically the reason I bring that up is because Brock Lesnar decided, out of his own, basically his own decision, Brock Lesnar decided in 2004, or at least 2005 or whatever, that he was going to go compete in New Japan for the, IWGP Championship. And basically what happened is because New Japan is on that international, worldwide, everybody can see this, everybody knows about it, everybody knows about the people there, situation and level, basically that got him in trouble, or at least legal trouble. But the courts are like, well, wait a minute. He doesn't work for you anymore, right? And your contract states that these people, these people that wrestle for you are independent, right? So basically, long story short, WWE had no choice to be like, oh, okay, fine. He doesn't have to abide by it. He can go wrestle. And that's why when he was in Japan, he renamed the F5 into the verdict. But yeah, basically, those are just various examples recently and previously of basically non-compete things being in effect, or basically, talents that either they're still under contract, still wrestling for them on television and all that. This is just another example of, hey, they can go and, especially under this new Triple H regime, they can go they can go and compete for these independent places, but they just can't, be seen on television if it's like the NWA or, GCW is a bit of an exception, I guess, because of the partnership with Josh Barnett, but still, it's more along the lines like NWA, the NWA is an exception and all that and everything. So it's just one of those situations where it's basically like certain talent. Like with the NXT TNA deal, that's different because they're allowing people to wrestle and get more experience and all that, as well as make a return to WWE even though they're under contract. It's a mutual agreement. It's a mutual agreement between all of them. And it's a partnership. NWA does not have a partnership with WWE. They don't. But WWE be willing to lend the talents out. On the condition that because they don't have a partnership, the match cannot be seen. If there was a partnership, then yeah, that would be the exception. It's kind of one of those unusual situations. It's kind of like if WWE had a partnership with New Japan, back in the early to mid 2000s, when Brock Lesnar was gone, he decided to go to New Japan. Basically, if they had a partnership with them, then yeah, there'd be a more than likely possibility that basically they would not be doing a cease and desist, and they'd be talking about the Brock Lesnar win and all that. So again, it's all about who you're partnered with, who you're partnered with in an equal capacity or at least beneficial capacity, stuff like that. And if you're not a partner, but WWE is willing to let that person go over and compete, again, the catch is you can't showcase that match. You can't. So yeah, it's unusual. It's unusual. I will admit that. But it's just one of those situations. It's like you're a partner with them, like TNA, like TNA is, no problem. You're not a partner, hey, still no problem. Just can't show the match on television. And again, the way this relates to non-compete is basically, hey, if you're a partner with us, yeah, we have no problem if they want to show up and continue wrestling and sign with you. But we do have a problem if you're not our partner and they sign with you, because that's in violation. Legal violation. Again, very complicated, very confusing, but that's just how things are working. But continuing on, they say, and I quote, "We're told by AEW sources that this absence did affect immediate creative plans for AEW Dynamite and Wrestle Dream, as did the unfortunate Kota Ibushi injury," which basically Ibushi came out and said that the injury he sustained on Collision in his match with Josh Alexander, that's going to put him out for about 2 years. Like, he might be cleared within a year or maybe even less, but basically he's like, look, I'm not taking any chances, and I'm going to give myself an additional, 12 months, an additional, 18 months, whatever, to get better and fully be ready to get back in the ring. But rereading here, it says, we're told by AEW sources that this absence did affect immediate creative plans for AEW Dynamite in Wrestle Dream, as did the unfortunate Kota Ibushi injury. However, there appears to be no bad blood towards Andrade, and the working plan is still for him to compete in AEW when the situation is cleared up. We'll be asking Tony Khan about this on today's media call, because Tony Khan, before any of his pay-per-view events, PLEs, if you will, does a media call to update people on the status of AEW, and he's willing to ask most questions, quote unquote, most questions. You got to put an asterisk there because there are some questions he'll be asked and he won't answer. He'll just try to divert it into a different kind of answer that's not what you were expecting. Now, closing out, it says, closing out, they say, and I quote, someone close to Andrade told Fightful he was in good spirits this week despite the situation and was keeping it very quiet. The period will be up in mid-December. So, in other words, by, World's End. By World's End, the period will be up. Basically, he'll be able to compete. That's what it's saying. It's got less than 20 days, but 20 days, that's next month. I don't know what they're talking about. Basically, I think they meant, I think they meant 40 days or something like that. Hold on, guys. Let me look something up. Hold on. Okay, guys, I had to double check my device there, my AI device. And basically, what they mean by mid-December is we could be looking exactly at potentially the Dynamite, before World's End, or at least two Dynamites, I should say, maybe three Dynamites before World's End, which would be perfect, for him to, show up again on AEW television and resume what he was going to do originally at Wrestle Dream with Kenny Omega. But yeah, basically that's not 20 days. Somebody's got to correct that. Okay, they did correct it. Oh no, did they correct it? Let me see. Did they correct it? Yeah. Oh no, they didn't correct it at the bottom. They need to correct that. But yeah, basically in almost 2 months, basically he'll be okay to show back up on AEW television. But yeah, this is a situation where it's just a miscommunicational mess on all fronts. One miscommunication is Andrade not reading the fine print. You think somebody that's wrestled for WWE in the past, and was let go from them, previously, you would think he would realize, hey, I got 90. Let me double check the status. Let me double check the status of my contractual situation. You think he'd realize, oh, I can't show up in AEW or anywhere for the next 90 days. Oops. I can't do that. Well, what do I do? Right? And apparently the 90 days basically is when the contract actually expires. Apparently that's what it sounds like. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. People got released and they had years left. That's true. They did have years left, but the problem is the 90 days are basically a way to speed up the process to get the contract to expire a lot sooner. Basically allow the contract to expire a lot sooner. But this is a situation to where basically he jumped the gun. He jumped the gun, literally. And, people make the comparison to him being like the Jeff Jarrett, of this generation, where he's just, jumping from one place to another. Well, a lot of us was shocked when Jeff Jarrett showed up on Nitro 24 hours after his match with Chyna, the Good Housekeeping match for the Intercontinental title, right? We were all surprised by that, like, what the heck? But apparently, the more we found out, basically, Jeff was, working without a contract. That basically the contract had lapsed, and he was working on a verbal agreement or a handshake to at least, be there long enough to drop the championship. But anyway, though, that, again, people make the comparison to Jarrett with Andrade, and Andrade, I guess, maybe thought he was channeling his inner Jeff Jarrett by doing what he did. But basically, yeah, it's just a miscommunicational mess. Miscommunicational mess. And I know some people like JD are going to look at this, and they've already commented on it and said it's hilarious. They're going to basically point at this and say this is just proof again that AEW and Tony Khan are not, playing with a full deck. They're not showing that they could be a legit professional company, the number two company in the land, because of the fact that they thought, hey, we'll just sign this guy, to a contract and everything, have his representatives talk to us and we'll sign him, da da da, without reading or without going into, potential discussion or realization that, oh, this guy might have some time left on his contract, let's double check. Because again, the initial word going around is he was fired. And the way it made it sound is that he had no reason to stick around. He had no reason to stay at home or and collect a paycheck and all that because of the fact that basically the way the reports made it sound, he was free. He was a free man. He could do, whatever he wanted. He can go wherever he wanted. But that's not the case. That's not the case and everything because apparently they attached the 90-day compete clause. Now, obviously, there are not. Now, I know people are saying that the 90-day thing shouldn't be, a reason anymore. The 90-day thing, was pretty much disinvolved, if you will. Pretty much legally became a non-factor due to the courts. That's true. But there are certain corporations that don't fall under certain standards. WWE is kind of like in that in-between status of, hey, we're a sports league, we're a sports entity, but we're also entertainment. And that entertainment part slightly overlaps the sports. So basically it's kind of like a 51-49 situation. It's like a 51% 51% to 49% situation to where it's like 51% of it is entertainment, 49% is the wrestling, is the sport of wrestling, and basically that's what's kind of, I guess, keeping WWE, it's keeping them kind of like, in that category of, hey, we don't have to worry about, the 90-day compete stuff being, taken away from us because we don't technically, by a small percentage, we don't technically fall under that category, at all. So that's the only saving grace they have is they don't fall under that category just by a slight percentage, and that's kind of a good thing. That's kind of a good thing for them, if you will, because that way, if they do want to retain talent after they've released them, they have 3 months to do so. They have 3 months to do so. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in the long. So we'll see what happens here in the long run. They might decide, look, we don't know. They might. Here's what I'm thinking. Triple H might be like, look, Andrade's going to get lost in that damn shuffle. I don't want him to get lost. I see great talent in him. I want to bring him back. And Andrade, he might be like, I don't know. I mean, I'm signed to these guys and all that. And Hunter might be like, look, you're still technically with us. So if you come back, sign this contract, I'll guarantee we'll make sure to right the wrong that was that was put on you when you were back the second time. That might happen. We don't know. But right now, it does feel like all he has to do is wait the rest of this month, the rest, all of November, and up to about mid-December, pre-Christmas, to basically jump the ship, or basically finally, arrive in AEW officially, to continue his career. But again, it's a miscommunicational deal because apparently nobody in WWE, the talent, the talent, the agents, the offices, they had no idea. They had no idea. Like, oops, we didn't think he had 90 days. We thought he was straight out fired. Again, miscommunication. It's a miscommunication deal. So again, it's miscommunication all around. Miscommunication, for WWE not letting people know that a lot of talents are still in the 90-day compete, still have the non-90-day compete clause in their contracts if we release them or what have you. And it's mainly because we're just slightly more entertainment than wrestling. And then also the miscommunication with Tony Khan and his crew, and Andrade's representatives for not checking the details, for not kind of asking the questions, looking things over, and making sure they have the legal right to sign this guy onto a contract again. So again, it's just, and for Andrade, it's on him thinking, hey, I'm fired. I don't have to abide by the 90-day non-compete clause. It's on him too, because again, he probably didn't believe he had to abide by that since he was terminated, fired. But oh, guess what? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So obviously he's taking it fine. He's obviously, realizing, okay, I made a mistake. I jumped the gun. That's on me. So he's probably thinking, you know what? I've got enough money to last me up until mid-December. I'm good. I'll make my return to AEW by then. I'll make my return to the Indies by then. But here's what's interesting, though. Here's what's interesting. When you look on social media, they do report, somebody actually put it out there, that it sounds like Andrade could be out for a year, not because of injury, but he could be out for a year due to this, basically violating, and breaching this 90-day non-compete deal. He could be out for a year. And if that's the case, then basically, if that's the case, I guess if I'm him, I would fight it in court. I would fight it in court and everything. So, hold on. Something just popped up here about a minute ago. Hold on, let me read this. Okay, so going off of what I just said, because like I said, if you look on social media, there are reports that are coming out. Now, again, it all depends on the source you believe, whether it's out, and this is coming from Brian Alvarez, who I guess if people were to choose a more believable source, they'd go with him than Meltzer. But this is what Alvarez had to say on the wrestling newsletter, for the F4W newsletter. This is what he just said. This is about a minute ago, and right now it's about, 11:53 a.m. Pacific? This is a minute ago that just got popped up on X. And this is courtesy of Wrestling Purists. They're quoting Alvarez here. And it says, and I quote, and this is from Brian Alvarez, it says, new TKO contracts have a clause where if you were okay, let me reread that. Okay, it says, and this is from Brian Alvarez, Wrestler Purist on Twitter, X, put this up. This is from Brian Alvarez from Wrestling Observer Newsletter. This is what Alvarez says, and I quote, new TKO contracts have a clause where if you are fired for cause or breach, there is a 1-year non-compete. The older contract had this, but it's standard now. This is the holdup involving Andrade. So basically, yeah, TKO's like, so obviously TKO's, now that WWE's under the banner, and hold on for a second when I read, hold on, I want to look at this. Yeah, a lot of people have responses to this. One person here on Twitter saying, sounds like if TK, that being Tony Khan, was doing a little contract tampering. Because remember, Tony Khan would blame WWE for doing some contract tampering. Well, they might have a point here where basically he's like, oh, I'm going to sign you, no problem. You don't have no compete clause? Cool. Guess what? He does. And guess what? You don't have him for a year maybe now because of that. And then you have one person responding going, 1 year? Yikes, laughing out loud. That's ridiculous. One person doesn't like it. One person here doesn't like it. They say, that's such a scumbag move, but what else do you expect from a scum company? Now, we don't know if he's talking about TKO. More than likely, it's TKO they're talking about, or maybe even AEW. But most likely, they're saying they're saying that that's such a scumbag move. But what else do you expect from a scum company? They're probably more than likely talking about TKO. More than likely. One person says TKO are scum, and then another person says, this whole situation is getting more confusing every hour, I swear. Now there is a response to the person that says TKO are scum. Let's see what they say. And this person says, and people will defend it. And then another person says, Andrade holds no responsibility? Basically questioning because that person questioning Andrade holds no responsibility. They're basically saying, so you're going to blame TKO for firing him over something that he should have had responsibility for. In other words, should have prevented from happening. Now, continuing on, Wrestling Purist also quotes about an hour ago, same thing, because they're just going off different observations. This is from this is from Mike Johnson at PWInsider Elite. This is what Wrestling Purist puts about an hour ago. They say the word making its way in lucha circles today is that Andrade could be kept out of ring for 1 year by WWE contractually due to breach of his WWE deal when he was terminated. That would be subject to whether that stipulation of his WWE deal could be challenged successfully from a legal perspective. So in other words, what they're saying basically, is the same thing, but they're also pointing out that, Andrade, if this is the case, if because he breached contract for showing back up showing back up nationally on national television, worldwide television on AEW Dynamite and attacking Kenny Omega, they're saying that basically for 1 year he could be out of action. Not because of an injury, because he didn't think things through. And like I said earlier, there was a miscommunicational situation between all parties and everything. So that looks like it's a strong possibility of happening. But they also saying that basically, this is a situation to where if it's legit, if the 1 year situation is legit, Andrade, if he wants to compete, wants to make some money, could potentially challenge it legally in court and say, hey, nobody told me about that. I have proof. Here's proof. And everything. And maybe he might be able to successfully win that, that claim. He might be able to win that challenge, and WWE and TKO would have no choice to be like, okay, fine. You can go. You can do what you want. That was on us. That's on us. We should have let you and everybody else know. And I'm sure after this is all said and done, they've met with talent and said, yeah, if you look at your contracts, look over your contracts again, they state that if we do release you for any reason, firing, termination, budget cuts, or we just have no need for you for the time being, you're going to have 90 days non-compete in your contracts, which means if you violate that, you won't be competing anywhere for 1 year. So this is really an interesting situation, and I know people like JD are going to be talking about it. I know Deluxe Man, just Alex as he's known now, will be talking about it. Everybody's going to be giving their own opinion on it. I know Solomonster is going to give his opinion on it during his podcast this upcoming week. Greg Morgan, I don't know if he'll give his opinion, but yeah, this is a really unique situation, really unique mess that all parties find themselves in. And the question is, who do you blame more than the other? Do you blame WWE, for the miscommunication, of not letting people know, yeah, he's still under contract to us? Do you put it on them and TKO? Do you put it on Andrade for not, double and triple checking his contract and realizing, oh, I can't really sign with anybody until these 3 months are up? Or do you put it on AEW and Tony Khan for wanting to, along with Andrade and his representatives, wanting to jump the gun and get him on television a lot quicker? Who do you think is to blame? Who do you think is to blame? Let me know. Let me know in the comments, if you will, if you haven't done so in the live chat by now. But yeah, this is again very interesting situation, and we'll just have to see what happens. If the 1 year thing becomes a reality, like Alvarez and Mike Johnson are reporting, if that becomes a reality, then yeah, he does have a right to challenge it in court, because I don't even think he knew about this situation. Because remember, a lot changed in the years that he was gone from WWE. A lot changed. So basically by having a lot change, he probably didn't realize that contracts themselves had changed. Contracts themselves had changed, and that basically things are a lot more different, and that you can't just immediately assume, oh, I can do this. That if you get terminated or fired, you basically got to wait it out. So again, really a really interesting situation right now. Really just very confusing, very very, very confusing, controversial situation right now between all parties, and everybody. We'll be honest. I'll be honest with you. Everybody has to basically uh, take the blame for this. Everybody has to legitimately take the blame for this, whether they want to or not. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Comment down below. And I got more here. This is actually before I go. This is more. Oh, okay, they're just saying the same thing that Covert TV is only saying the same thing that Rusty Purist did from Brian Alvarez. But yeah, let me know again, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. If you will, love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't done so already in the live chat with possible super chats, let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. And as I said at the beginning, guys, do me all a favor, like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere and support me elsewhere outside of YouTube. But guys, love to hear what your take is on this. And until then, I am out.